as recommended by the Conference Committee. Remarks. The good member from the 45th District, Representative Goodman.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good evening. I rise in support of the Conference Committee report and ask that the House adopt the report. This is, needless to say, extremely important legislation as we consider it on the last day of the session. This bill, this package represents the next major step in a paradigm shift towards providing evidence-based responses to those suffering from substance use disorder. We've been talking for years that, oh, the drug problem is a public health problem, it's not a criminal problem. And we've been talking the talk, but we haven't been walking the walk. This bill, however, we're finally putting our money where our mouth is. We are going to be providing more than $250 million just for this bill alone as part of the larger, even larger investments in behavioral health in general. So we're going to be walking the walk when it comes to substance use disorder. There's concern about the criminal penalties. Some are concerned that there are any criminal penalties at all. Others are concerned that it's too much. There's not enough of a so-called hammer to get those into treatment. So in effect, this is, I guess, a compromise. Everyone's equally unhappy. But in fact, we need to take a look at how this is going to play out, irrespective of what the criminal penalties are. As this plays out, this will be a significant improvement in policy. First, police will be able to intervene immediately. There aren't going to be the 2 referrals ahead of arrest. Police will be able to intervene immediately, and that point of encounter will be meaningful, whether it is arrest or whether it is referral to therapeutic services. Second, this is a dramatic expansion of therapeutic care for those who are languishing on the streets, those most marginalized, those most vulnerable in our society. A dramatic expansion of treatment. And third, connected to that, there will be much better integration of treatment providers, police, courts, street outreach workers, and so forth to help make this whole system work. There is a severe risk if we do not pass this legislation that there will be a patchwork of inconsistent ordinances around the state. And not only that, and more important than that, it will not be treatment focused. We want to provide therapeutic care. We don't want to be punishing people who are suffering from a behavioral health disorder. So we have to have a uniform statewide approach. Madam Speaker, I hope that we follow the science, that we act with compassion, and make sure that we build in accountability and provide the funding to pull all of this together. Please support the conference report. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further remarks, the good member from the 20th District, Representative Obarno.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise in opposition of this conference report. Sadly, this is not the bipartisan support bill that we would like to see, one that we were working on compromise. This is not it. And in reality, I think this is more dangerous than doing nothing, Madam Speaker. While it does create a gross misdemeanor, not the gross misdemeanor most would think of. In most cases where there's a deferred prosecution or diversion, someone who is alleged to commit a crime stipulates. This is a case where none of that ever happens. An individual can play gamesmanship with the system, wait it out until witnesses and evidence is stale, and sadly continue to go through the cycle of the judicial process. What's even more troubling, Madam Speaker, is the fact that the state is going to, in this policy, preempt local governments from passing local restrictions on paraphernalia. Therefore, Madam Speaker, there could be an organization sanctioned by the state coming into my neighborhood, next to my school, to pass out syringes, smoking devices, and so many other dangerous items that perpetuates the drug abuse, perpetuates this cycle that we're trying to stop. That's what this policy does. It establishes health engagement hubs that are affiliated with syringe service programs that allow for minors to be there, unattended minors. There's no restriction. This isn't about best practice. This is not the best practice. This is not evidence-based. And this is not data-driven to allow minors to be in these hubs around needle exchanges and drug use. In addition, it creates recovery residences that allow for people who are currently using to be in the same room, maybe in a bed next to someone who's trying to recover. That's not best practices. That's not evidence-based. That's not based on the data. To allow someone who's trying to get their life cleaned and straight next to someone who's continuing to use. This policy also removes the requirement to notify a local government when you're citing a treatment facility of this type in the community. This takes away all local control. It doesn't share the values of me, my community, or the state of Washington, and I'd ask for a no vote.
Further remarks? The member from the 34th District, Representative Alvarado.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I respectfully ask for a no vote today. In my district, in my communities in downtown Seattle, Pioneer Square, West Seattle, my constituents are suffering. They're openly suffering from drug addiction, from substance use disorder, from the grips of fentanyl. I see a public health emergency that demands urgent action and sustained solutions. I see a public health crisis that demands evidence-based response, treatment, services, pathways to recovery, housing, and jobs. I see constituents who deserve to be treated like they have a chronic health condition, not like criminals, because criminalizing drug use has not worked. It has not deterred people from using drugs. It has not stopped drugs from coming into our streets. It has not made our communities healthy and safe. No, the evidence shows that criminalization of drugs has helped contribute to the mass incarceration of people, particularly people of color. It's broken families, it's dislocated communities, it's blocked people from employment and from housing. It's been massively expensive, it's done harm, and it hasn't helped stop people from using drugs. It hasn't stopped drugs from coming into our communities, and it hasn't made our communities healthy and safe. I'm grateful to my colleagues who have been fighting hard for investments in our behavioral health care system. Those investments work, but I believe we can make those investments without penalizing people for using drugs. We don't have to hurt people to help people. I'll be voting no.
Further remarks? The member from the 18th District, Representative Cheney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to urge you to vote no with a heavy heart. Madam Speaker, you and I have talked before about my great desire to help those with mental health and substance abuse disorders. Madam Speaker, I fear that this bill is not the right vehicle to do that. Madam Speaker, I am concerned that this bill, as written, does not learn the lessons of the 20 to 30 years of phenomenal drug courts and substance abuse courts that are currently operating in this state. What I mean by that, Madam Speaker, is that oftentimes in a deferred prosecution or in a stipulated order of continuance, it is critically important that the individual take responsibility, even if a written form, to say, I have a problem, Madam Speaker. We saw that yesterday or 2 days ago. This body voted off the floor by nearly a unanimous vote the deferred prosecution to give 2 opportunities to those with alcohol and substance abuse treatment a problem. But as part of that, they are required to admit they have a problem. Madam Speaker, the problem with the diversion in my view of having worked in the drug courts for nearly 10 years is that it doesn't require that type of ownership of responsibility. It's important because oftentimes when I talk to folks, they can tell me exactly how many days they've been sober, Madam Speaker. And I think that the ownership of the problem is part of the solution. I want these people to get better. I want these people to get treated. But Madam Speaker, not requiring them to acknowledge they have a problem is not the right path to go. There's another problem with this bill, Madam Speaker, and that is for a very small segment of the population, as much as it pains me to admit this, they do not want treatment. They simply don't. I wish they did, Madam Speaker. That is the hardest target audience, if you will, to get to. But they refuse to acknowledge they have a problem and don't want the help. Madam Speaker, at some point, for the safety of community, they have to go to jail. And I'm concerned that this bill doesn't do that. Even under the deferred prosecution that we passed several days ago by nearly a unanimous vote, they would still go to jail. Unfortunately, those safeguards are not in this bill. I urge a no vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further remarks, the member from the 37th District, Representative Street.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please vote no on this bill. Criminalization of drugs has been a catastrophic failure for our country. It's broken lives, destroyed families, and torn our communities apart. These effects have been borne by communities of color. These effects have been borne by the 37th District, which is one of the most diverse districts in this state. I agree that we have a substance abuse epidemic, and communities like mine want that fixed as well. That's why I appreciate the public health and harm reduction aspects of this bill. We must invest in this infrastructure so that people can get the help that they need. While criminal penalties are billed as a benign tool to encourage treatment, communities of color have countless stories and years of sentences that say otherwise. Harsh penalties don't dissuade drug usage, but they do have unintended consequences like barring people from housing and services. Please don't double down on the mistakes of the past and the war on drugs. If you do end up voting for this, then please join me next session in fixing our existing laws and preventing the new criminalization of drugs from barring people from housing and services.
Further remarks, the good member from the 7th District, Representative Maycumber.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think what the important part that you're hearing on both sides, which is all together, is that we care. We care, and we're scared. We're scared for our kids. We're scared for the future. And we want something to fix it. We all want something to fix it. Every single one of us. Madam Speaker, I am here to say I voted for the last Blake fix. I am willing to do everything I can to fix it, but I have to make a vote for my constituency. And unfortunately, a lot of these points in the policy at hand that we are voting on won't be available. Maybe a decade. The funding mechanism, I asked when it was briefed, is it $1 billion? What are we looking at? What are we looking for housing? I can't even get houses for teachers and doctors to come into my district. Where do we put them? How do they get help? I support drug courts. I support therapeutic courts. We have those in my district. What do I do with, mixed housing and health hubs and preemption for paraphernalia? I understand the framework, but where is it? Where is it for my people that I represent? Where is it for the children that walk around and see the kids that can't go to the park anymore? That can't go play basketball, and they tell me because it's too dangerous. Madam Speaker, what about those kids? I want to support something that talks about how to help the people of all of Washington, but this doesn't do it. There is not enough support in these other locations in the state of Washington to help those people. Madam Speaker, this isn't equity. It isn't. There's no houses, there's no way to reach them. And then to tell local governments, maybe we'll come in with safe injection sites, maybe we'll come in with paraphernalia exchanges, maybe we'll come. The people in my district are asking for help, and we're telling them we know better than you. You know, Madam Speaker, I don't agree with incarceration. I don't agree with felonies, but incarcerated people are alive, Madam Speaker. And if we can get them help in the system we have now through drug court, they will be alive for tomorrow. And some of those are about to be our children and the next generation, Madam Speaker. We need a program that fits all of Washington. All of Washington. Not the wealthy districts, not the setup, not the grant programs that are set up in our funding mechanism, but all of Washington should have equal access to becoming.
Further remarks? The good member from the 44th District, Representative Berg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to be clear in this moment that I am a yes vote. I want to be clear in this moment that I believe a no vote on this conference report is a vote to legalize drugs on July 1st.
You may speak to your vote, Representative Berg, but not to others' votes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my district is large and diverse. As you drive through my district, you'll go through many cities. You'll go through much of unincorporated Snohomish County. Madam Speaker, chaos will ensue if local governments are allowed to make their own drug use policy, city by city, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. Madam Speaker, the folks in my community with substance use disorder are not they. They are us. We are a community. I love my community. I love every block and every neighborhood and every person in that community. And I believe this bill will help people get the help they need. Madam Speaker, this bill is an answer to potential chaos. I believe that if we do not pass this bill, we will have more crime. We will have more people hurting in community. There will be more harm to people. There will be more harm to taxpayers. Madam Speaker, I am asking for a yes vote on this bill. I am asking for a yes vote to help my community, to help communities across our state, communities that are asking us, asking me for help.
Further remarks? The member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please vote no. Madam Speaker, you should vote no because the policies, the patchwork of confused, well-intended, but ultimately flawed policies in this bill extend failure that the people of Washington are living with every day. It will extend failure that looks like addicts on the sidewalks of our streets. It will extend failure that looks like dealers dealing fentanyl and methamphetamine and heroin near our schools. Madam Speaker, in my district, we've experimented with many of the proposed policies in this bill. We've tried the kind of hub housing, the kind of sheltering described in this bill. It failed. Madam Speaker, it drew active users to sleep next to people struggling to get clean. It drew dealers into state-subsidized housing. The number of needles in our parks increased. The number of crack pipes on the sidewalks became a scourge. We were able to rectify some of this damage, Madam Speaker, by counting on local ordinances and local action to clean up our streets and strike down on these failed policies. Madam Speaker, we have a drug crisis in this state. But it is not our civil society's response to the unlawful behavior that's the crisis. Madam Speaker, it is the use of the drugs themselves. That's the crisis. Criminalization in our legal system is simply a tool or a set of tools to try to remedy the problem. But the problem is one of individual agency. And what our system can do when it works is help an individual person do better in their lives. Madam Speaker, law enforcement in my communities have asked for a policy with teeth that will really get sick people better, will really get addicts on a better path. This policy does not do that, Madam Speaker. Please vote no.
Further remarks? The good member from the 45th District, Representative Springer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to just put a slightly different perspective. In urban design, when people design downtowns, there's a concept called third places. The first place is your home. The second place is where you work. The third place is where you gather. And it's those third places in 280 towns in Washington that create a sense of community, where people go to be with one another, where they go to bring their children and their dogs and their neighbors. 40 years ago, my wife and I set out to build such a business. And 40 years later, our business is one of Kirkland's third places. It's a really delightful place, but it hasn't been so delightful lately. People gather on our deck in the summer, sit outside, have a glass of wine. But in the last few years, they've had to compete with people who are using illicit drugs on the sidewalk, actually walking onto the deck and sitting with them at a table and asking for money. That destroys a third place. It doesn't take long before word gets around. My city and the cities that are in that East Puget Sound region are asking me, Larry, please do something. Your vote, Representative Springer, a no vote on this bill is to say to them, I don't care. That
Please make sure to speak to your own vote, Representative Springer, not to anyone else's. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That was my intent, but I may have strayed. At any rate, I will conclude by saying my neighbors and my business partners are asking me, even if it's not perfect, please do something. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 14th District, Representative Mossbrooker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And unfortunately, I'll also be a no on this bill. I had hoped to vote yes on this bill as earlier. Madam Speaker, the drug crisis in Washington State is heartbreaking. And this has to do with our friends, our family, constituents. This isn't another country. This isn't another place. This is our state, our nation, and our loved ones who are suffering. We've heard many stories tonight to that effect. We're not created in order to live our lives in suffering, not being depressed, not being defeated, guilty, condemned, or simply unworthy. What I've learned through this process mostly is that many of those suffering from addiction, they don't feel like they're worthy enough for recovery. And this bill doesn't help with that, in my opinion, with my vote. We hear from them over and over the stories that we need to reach out, we need to be there for them, and we've heard from those that protect us in our communities, from law enforcement, from prosecutors, that it doesn't get us here. And I would argue after reading this bill over and over and over that it actually sets many people suffering from addiction on the path of failure, which would again make them feel more unworthy. I asked for a no vote today, and I feel like in the state of Washington and across the nation, this has to be our #1 priority. People are dying in the street. We are in what I call a state of emergency, but we need to give them something that works. If the state of Washington can't give meaningful help, then I vote no and ask the local government to take control. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 24th District, Representative Theringer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What we've heard tonight, I think, on this floor, excuse me, is a lot of acceptance and understanding that we have a challenge. And part of that challenge is we have to bridge the gap between our criminal justice system and a treatment and service and recovery system. That's different than, as I understood, the war on drugs. We've heard that, the war on drugs was a failure. I think we understand that. This is not about the war on drugs. And there was pain from the war on drugs. There's no question about that. This is about a new way. This is about building that bridge. We have heard about the hodgepodge of services, the hodgepodge of different criminal adjustments or criminal approaches, Madam Speaker. What this bill does is give us consistency. It gives us consistency on the criminal side and the service side. And it gives us a step. The first bricks, if you will, Madam Speaker, on that bridge. By a yes vote tonight, we start building that bridge. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 23rd District, Representative Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a really, really hard day for me. As you know, I joined the legislature in 2020 and 2021, January, and in February, the Supreme Court decision came in Blake, and I was here as, I believe, the only person with a Blake conviction, and the first Blake bill I didn't vote for, and it was a simple misdemeanor, and it had 2 mandatory law enforcement diversions. And I was really proud that I was able to stand here the other night and vote for the House version of this bill that had a simple misdemeanor and restored law enforcement ability to arrest. That means I had grown a little bit from my own traumatic experience and was responding to the needs of my community. Unfortunately, I can't vote for this bill because it's a gross misdemeanor, and having gone to jail and detoxed from drugs in jail and know the conditions and the dehumanization of that experience and the separation from my children and the consequences that has had on my life in every way, I cannot replicate that harm. But I do want to combat some things I'm hearing on this floor, because if it wasn't for that gross misdemeanor, I would vote for this bill. And I want to point out, if I believed that this legislature would monitor the disparities and actually pull back and go to a misdemeanor in the future, I would vote for this bill. But it's been my experience, it's harder to undo things once we do them. But I do want to speak to the very good things in this bill and about the lived experience of people in recovery and what we need. And the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is connection. And this bill does give hope to a lot of people who are stuck in addiction because they don't have anybody, because they don't love themselves. They don't know how. They were never loved as children, and they don't know how to love themselves, and that's why they use drugs. And if we can give them a recovery navigator like this bill does, and they can start to feel that love from someone who's walked that path, they can get into housing first and eventually get clean and sober. And this bill does provide for a lot of support for people. And so it is with a heavy heart that I'm not voting for this, but I won't be mad if you vote for it, Madam Speaker.
Further remarks? The good member from the 49th District, Representative Stonier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Standing to ask you to join me in supporting the bill. I'm voting yes on the concurrence report for a number of reasons. First, the treatment, as we just heard, is personalized. That means not only do you get care, but you get somebody walking alongside you through that care and recognizes that part of addiction is not always staying on the straight path. And that support is necessary for success. I'm voting yes because I'm fearful of what this bill failing would do to my community and to communities across the state. This bill failing and my desire to vote yes is because I fear that drug use will be different on one side of the street than it is on another. That is a fact. Cities are introducing ordinances now that will make that a fact. I'm voting yes because of my conversation with my sheriff today, who has problems with the bill, yes, but knows that the failure of this bill will send our community into chaos. I spoke to my mayor today. I know people from my community did the same. The failure of this bill would mean that drugs would be legalized across the state, and everything that comes with substance use disorder, defecation on the streets, needles in our parks, all of the things we've heard about that we fear will be worse if this bill fails. I'm voting yes because I know that we can provide the care that people need. The humanitarian approach to care is in this bill. Madam Speaker, we talked tonight about how people want to fix it. This bill is a new path to fixing it, as we heard from the gentleman from the 24th. We cannot keep doing what has been failing. We have to do something new and different. Madam Speaker, I ask you to join me in voting yes, because there is not a better option on the table. It is sine die. There is not a better option. Please vote yes.
Further remarks? The good member from the 30th District, Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've been listening carefully to all the words that have been shared on both sides of the aisle tonight. And it pains me that we're at this moment when we have a national, an international public health crisis, and that we will want to have solutions that heavily rely on local jurisdictions alone. I'm suffering through and thinking through how that would work and how that would function. We have a compromise where it's quite interesting how just a few days ago, local cities and counties were saying there are no resources in our community, yet today they have the resources and they have the solutions to fix this problem. I'm struggling with that. I feel like we're at an all hands on deck moment where we need our federal delegation to help us. We need the state involvement to help us. We need the local leaders to help us. We need our families to help us. We need our neighbors to help us. Voting no on this bill doesn't move us to decriminalization, quite the opposite. We will have a patchwork. But even more than that, we will have cities and counties who will now have to focus their efforts, prioritize their efforts on this alone. So that our efforts to expand middle housing, our efforts to deploy resources for other purposes that help build communities will take a back seat. We'll have communities who would want to prioritize economic development, help our main streets, help our neighbors who are business owners. They will have to focus on other things other than job creation to prioritize this. I don't know how cities and counties who already spend 50 to 70% of their budgets are going to find the money to now prioritize this. We have law enforcement who are struggling in the streets to have solutions because they see the same individuals over and over and over. And now the only option that they have is to send somebody to the hospital, the emergency room, who will now have to prioritize this. Acute care is going to take a back seat to someone who has to be addressed in this way. Yes, our communities need solutions, and this solution is not perfect, but it's something that moves us towards a public health response to help get someone along the way. We must walk hand in hand to move our communities in the direction of actually doing the right thing and addressing the root causes of this public health crisis that is a global crisis. We must walk together.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is final passage of engrossed second substitute Senate Bill 5536. The Speaker's, as recommended by the Conference Committee. The Speaker is about to open the roll call machine. The Speaker has opened the roll call machine. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? The Speaker is about to lock the roll call machine. The Speaker has locked the roll call machine. Having not received a will the clerk please take the record?
Madam Speaker, there are 43 yeas, 55 nays, 0 excused.
Having not received a constitutional majority, engrossed second substitute Senate Bill 5536, as reported by the Conference Committee, is not passed.